Families do not simply love their children, they organize them. Every family is a system before it is a relationship, and like any system under pressure, it will do what systems do: distribute load, assign function, maintain equilibrium. Someone will be the stable one, someone will be the difficult one, someone will be the one who never needs anything, someone will be the one who can't seem to manage without help. These are not personalities, they are positions, and in most families the positions are assigned early, long before the child has the language to question them, long before they have the option to refuse. Bowen spent decades watching families from the outside and arrived at a conclusion that most people find uncomfortable. What looks like a person's character is often the residue of a role they were handed inside a system that needed someone to play it. The family doesn't develop you, it deploys you. Let's begin with a specific kind of father, not absent. Present, loudly, heavily, structurally present. This is the father whose judgment fills the room, whose decisions don't invite revision, whose emotional register sets the temperature for everyone else, whose approval is oxygen and whose disapproval is weather. In Bowen's framework, this is not simply a strong personality. It is a high dominance position in an undifferentiated system. Differentiation of self. One of the central concepts in Bowen's family systems theory refers to the capacity to maintain a stable sense of self while remaining emotionally connected to others. It is not independence, it is not distance. It is the ability to be in the room with someone without being absorbed by them. A high dominance father creates a particular problem. He compresses the differentiation space for everyone around him. When one person in a system occupies the position of arbiter, authority, and emotional center simultaneously, the others must choose between two forms of survival: adapt down or escalate into direct conflict. Children, who lack both the leverage and the developmental resources to survive sustained conflict with a primary caregiver, almost always adapt down. They read the room, they calibrate. They learn which expressions of self are costly and which are safe. Over time, what Bowen called the family projection process does its work. The child begins to carry the family's anxiety. Their behavior is perpetually read as a referendum on whether the system is functioning. Are you performing well enough to not embarrass the family? Are you quiet enough to not trigger the father's irritation? Are you grateful enough to justify the stability you've been given? The child who grows up inside this structure does not become weak in the way we ordinarily mean it. Their cognitive capacities may be entirely intact, their competence may be genuinely high, but their will has been managed, their self-assertion has been routed around. Their capacity for autonomous judgment has gone underground, not because it doesn't exist, but because every time it surfaced, it was met with correction, dismissal, or the particular violence of being ignored by someone whose attention you could not afford to lose. Bowen would describe this child as low in differentiation, not unintelligent, not broken, but fused with the emotional field of the family system in a way that makes it genuinely difficult to know where the family ends and the self begins. The system does not need to say, be less than you are. It simply makes being more than you are structurally expensive, and children are rational actors inside irrational systems. They learn the price, they stop paying it. Now consider a different kind of father, not dominant, absent, or present in body but evacuated in function. The father who doesn't make decisions, who can't hold the ground when things get difficult, who expresses need more fluently than protection, whose presence does not reduce the family's anxiety, it generates it. Salvador Minuchin, working from structural family therapy, would look at this arrangement and identify the problem not as weakness or character failure in the father, but as a structural collapse in the family system. In Minuchin's model, a functioning family requires clear hierarchical boundaries, a parental subsystem that holds executive function, decision-making, limit, setting, emotional regulation, and a child subsystem that is, structurally speaking, protected from having to do the adult's job. When the paternal function collapses, the family system does not simply absorb the loss, it redistributes the load, and the redistribution is not voluntary. The child does not choose to step into the gap. They are pulled there by the structural gravity of a system that cannot function without someone filling the role. This is what Minuchin called parentification. The child begins to monitor the emotional state of the family. They become the one who soothes the mother's anxiety, mediates the tension between adults, anticipates needs before they become crises, and maintains the atmospheric conditions under which everyone else can function. To observers outside the family, this child looks sectional. They are mature beyond their years. calm under pressure, perceptive. Responsible, what these observers are watching is not development. It is structural occupation. The child is not growing up. They are filling a position that was vacated by someone who should have held it. This is a critical distinction because parentification is not neutral in its effects. The child who is parentified does not gain the capacity of the adult role they are occupying. They gain the load of it without the authority, the developmental foundation, or the freedom to put it down. The precocious responsibility is not evidence of psychological robustness, it is evidence of structural necessity. The family needed someone to be capable here. The child was available. The family used what was available. What looks like strength from the outside is, in Minuchin's terms, a boundary violation at the generational level. The child was not allowed to be a child because the system had no one else to be an adult. And this matters enormously for what happens next, because you cannot occupy a role for 20 years and then simply vacate it. The structural position becomes internalized. The patterns of vigilance, responsibility, and self-suppression that were adaptive inside the family system become the architecture of the self. The adult who is parentified as a child often cannot stop performing the function. They become the person who holds things together in every room they enter, not because the room needs it, but because they never learned what it feels like to simply be in a room. So far we have two trajectories. The compressed child, shaped by a dominant paternal presence, into someone who learned to need less, assert less, occupy less space. The premature adult, shaped by a collapsed paternal function, into someone who learned to hold more, absorb more, perform more competence than they actually had. Both look like different people, both are the product of the same underlying failure. Heinz Kohut, working from self-psychology, would locate that failure at the level of the self-object. A self-object, in Kohut's formulation, is not simply a person. It is the psychological function a person provides that allows the self to develop, stabilize, and cohere. The child needs a specific set of these functions, mirroring. The experience of being seen, recognized, and valued, idealization. The experience of relating to someone powerful and stable, whom they can internalize as a source of strength, and twinship. The experience of being similar to another, of not being entirely alone in their experience. The father is one of the child's primary self-object sources. The dominant, controlling father often destroys the mirroring function, not because he is inattentive, he may be intensely attentive, but because his attention is evaluative rather than receptive. The child is not seen, they are assessed. What they receive is not, you exist and that is enough, but you measure up or you do not. When mirroring consistently functions as evaluation, the child's self-development begins to organize not around intrinsic worth but around performance. They develop what Kohut called a compensatory structure, a way of generating the internal stability the environment failed to provide by substituting achievement, competence, or approval, seeking for the foundational experience of simply being recognized. The absent or dysfunctional father produces a different failure. The idealization function breaks down. The child cannot find in the father a stable, powerful presence they can safely look up to, whose strength they can gradually internalize as their own. Instead, they are left to generate their own internal authority before they have the developmental resources to do it well. The result is what Kohut described as a vertical split on one side of the divide, a highly functional, capable, apparently confident self that has learned to operate effectively in the world, on the other side, an unmet developmental need, a part of the self that never received the mirroring, the containment, the experience of being held by someone stronger, that persists encapsulated, unintegrated. The person is genuinely capable, and simultaneously genuinely fragile in ways they may not fully register until a relationship, a failure, or a moment of stillness makes the encapsulated need suddenly visible. The compressed child and the premature adult both carry versions of this vertical split. The compressed child, visible competence concealing an evacuated will. The premature adult, visible strength concealing an unmet need for someone else to hold the weight. In both cases, the adaptation that allowed them to survive the family system has become a structure they cannot easily dismantle. Because it is not only a behavior pattern, it has become a belief about what they are allowed to be. Here is where the analysis becomes uncomfortable, because the family system does not stay outside. Ronald Fairbairn's object relations theory offers what may be the most precise account of how the external structure of the family becomes the internal architecture of the self. Fairbairn's central argument. The child does not simply experience a difficult relationship with the father. They internalize the father as an internal object, a structure within the psyche that continues to operate long after the father himself is no longer in the room. In particular, Fairbairn identified what he called the rejecting object, the internalized version of the caretaker who withheld, dismissed, evaluated, controlled, or simply was not adequate to the child's need. This internal object does not become passive. It becomes a voice. It becomes the part of you that says you are not doing enough. You are not earning your place. You are too much, or you are not enough, and either way you should be smaller or better or simply different from what you are. The child who grew up under a controlling father does not only carry the behavioral habit of self-compression, they carry the father's judgment as an internal presence, a structure that will reassert the original relational dynamic in every context that resembles it. The child who grew up with an absent or weak father does not only carry the habit of overfunctioning, they carry the absence as an internal experience of insufficiency, a persistent sense that the ground beneath them is not quite solid, and that they must, at all times, be doing more to prevent some unspecified collapse. This is why the adaptation outlasts the family. You left the house did not leave you. The compressed child enters their first serious relationship and finds, quietly, that they are doing it again, making themselves smaller, deferring when they don't want to, interpreting disagreement as danger. The premature adult enters their first serious relationship and finds, quietly, that they are doing it again, holding the emotional weight for both people, finding it nearly impossible to say, I need something I cannot provide for myself. Neither of them is being weak. Neither of them is failing. They are executing, with extraordinary fidelity, the adaptive structure that once allowed them to survive a system that did not leave them much choice. There is a failure mode specific to psychology content. It tends to end in resolution, in the implication that understanding the structure is the same as escaping it. That is not what this is. Understanding Bowen does not immediately increase your differentiation. Naming the parentification does not immediately relieve you of the function. Identifying the compensatory structure does not dissolve it. Recognizing Fairbairn's rejecting object does not silence the voice. What it does, what rigorous analysis of family systems has always done at its most honest, is refuse the consoling fiction that the self you are walking around in is simply, naturally, originally, the strength you carry may be a position you were assigned. The deference you perform may be a survival strategy you developed before you had an alternative. The family needed someone to be compressed. The family needed someone to be capable, and you were available, and you learned. That is not a character flaw. It is not a destiny, but it is also not nothing. The work, if there is work to be done, begins not with wanting to be different, but with the rather more unsettling recognition that some portion of what you have always called yourself was designed by a system that had its own requirements and was not particularly concerned with what you might have needed. The family does not raise you, it assigns you. What you do with the assignment is a different question. I am